hence the name. So we've also seen the teams at the launch site working hard to finalise the installation of the catch arms, lovingly called the chopsticks, on the launch tower. As soon as this is finalised, it's going to allow future catching of both a booster and Starship, but in the short term it's also going to provide the ability to stack the Starship and Super Heavy together, as we saw back in August. This time though without the use of the LR11350 crane. On Monday, the teams installed large pulleys on the arms which will enable them to move and perform the necessary operations. The next day, a hydraulic actuator was also lifted and installed for fit checks, and it was later then lowered down. This will be used to move and control the arms. On Thursday, we actually saw the arms move laterally for the first time, which gives us a glimpse of how the arms move to catch the massive Super Heavy booster. So yes, who would have thought that we'd see such an outrageous but amazing recovery system being actually built here? We've talked about this a lot, but it still kind of blows my mind every week. We also got some wonderful views of the production and launch site as SpaceX put out an amazing video named Gateway to Mars on Twitter. It not only showed some really cool shots inside the production tents, but it also included a beautiful zoom out shot of the orbital launch tower during the first stacking of Ship 20 over the top of Booster 4. Always terrific to see some fresh new video content like this from SpaceX. Sadly, the copy here on Twitter is only at 720p, so let's hope that they publish this in a higher quality format at some point. Work on Booster 4 continued, and this week we saw these aero covers just beside suborbital pad A waiting for installation. These covers have some heat shield tiles installed on them, which I suspect are just test samples. Perhaps in future we'll see these more fully or just partially covered with tiles. The idea here is that they're going to protect the protruding COPVs from high atmospheric forces during the flight. We also saw teams working on what seems to be the heat shield around the skirt of the Super Heavy. This will not only protect the booster during the re-entry, but also from the immense heat of the nearby Raptor engines during the ascent. Now, there has been a steady delivery of Raptor engines for the future Starship and Super Heavy orbital launches. This week we saw the arrival of Raptor Boost 30, 32 and 33 engines at the production site. 2 of the Raptor engines were then headed to the launch pad, and they were integrated with Ship 20. On Thursday, the remaining 2 Raptor vacuum engines were brought in and installed, which now means that this beast now has all the Raptor engines it needs for the orbital flight. Now, there is a chance that SpaceX might conduct a triple engine static fire of the C-level Raptor engines, so keep your eye out for a new set of beach road closure dates. Now, speaking of Raptor engines, we got some juicy updates from Elon regarding the first static fire of Raptor version 2. Currently, of course, all the engines that we've recently seen in action are version 1. The new engines not only have significant improvements, but they're also highly simplified. Elon tweeted the other day that the engine got to 321 bar before a rapid unscheduled disassembly, adding that the cause may be due to oxygen inlet pressure being too low rather than it being an engine issue. That is a sign that perhaps SpaceX could be able to push the engine even higher. Although this tweet didn't explicitly mention Raptor 2, when asked about the Raptor's thrust, Elon replied saying that Raptor 2 has a larger throat diameter, so the thrust is 245 tons at 321 bar. So yes, this confirms that the previous tweet was indeed about Raptor 2. For those of you who are not aware, the 321 bar of pressure refers to the pressure experienced by the combustion chamber of the Raptor engine. This chamber is the heart of any rocket engine. The fuel injectors spray the incoming fuel and the oxidizer in, where it is then ignited. Previously, the Russian-made RD-701 was the record holder for the highest chamber pressure at over 303 bar, but this engine never went into operation. For an operational engine, the record belonged to the Russian RD-180, which powers United Launch Alliance's Atlas V at 267 bar. This was uncontested for years before the Raptor engine finally broke this record in 2020, where Elon tweeted about the Raptor engine reaching 330 bar of chamber pressure without exploding. Now, just a quick shout out to the Starship Artists of Spaceflight team for the creation of this calendar. I did a shout out for this a few weeks back, but hey, I've just received it in the mail literally today. So yeah, check this out. The video probably won't do it justice, but the quality is just beautiful. Each month has a terrific render by many of the amazing artists out there that provide the space community with all of this magic every week. You can order that direct through them from the link in the description below to support all of their amazing work. This doesn't go through me in anyway. I just absolutely love it, and they have just been so thrilled with the responses of it all. So thank you all for supporting what they are doing and for also following and subscribing to their channels as well. That has already helped them a great deal, just as it does for me when you are liking, sharing or subscribing my videos right here. Amazing of you all to help the community to do what we all do. Throughout the week, we saw the team working on Booster 2.1's test tank. Now, we didn't know what they were planning to do with this, but now we do. On Thursday, it was rolled over to the booster test stand and was lifted in place. It's clear that SpaceX wants to conduct some more tests using this tank and this equipment. Now, if you have been following SpaceX's Starship development for quite some time, you know that these big cranes are crucial for Starbase operations. On Friday morning, a brand new LR11000 crane arrived at the launch site, and we've been expecting its arrival now for quite some time. This is a twin of the big yellow crane at the launch site, but this one is painted black and has a huge SpaceX logo on it. Where the previous cranes at Starbase have largely been rented, this one is actually owned by SpaceX, and to waste no time, the teams immediately got to work to assemble it. Over at the build site, SpaceX continues to increase their production rate for Starship and Super Heavy. Due to this, they need a larger space to process these vehicles, and that is where the new wide bay comes in. As the name suggests, it is just like high bay, but a lot wider, allowing the teams to work on more Starships and boosters. They need the much larger facilities to finalise the stacking and essential work on the new launch vehicles just before they head to the launch pad for testing. Work on the new wide base foundation has been going on for the past month as workers complete foundation work laying down the concrete for its base. Only recently we saw the crane here being rigged with these beams, which were then lifted and put into place. Thanks to RGV aerial photography, Mauricio's latest flight midweek shows us that there are a lot of parts for the wide bay that have already arrived. It surely looks like SpaceX is very eager to get this construction done as quickly as possible. Likewise, SpaceX teams have been steadily marching forward to complete the production of the next orbital Starship, Ship 21. We'll dive into that more in just a second, but before that, a big thank you to Squarespace for the terrific support of the channel here. Squarespace encompasses all of the basic tools that you need to get your next website up and running. Remember when you needed an expensive web developer to get a simple site published? Well, no more. You can just select a mobile responsive template from the extensive list available to match your brand and start entering your content. Along with the awesome inbuilt tools, you will also find an extensive library of third-party extensions out there as well to accomplish even more to help you manage, optimize and expand your site further. The help and support is terrific too. The YouTube channel alone releases new tutorial videos each week, and the Squarespace blog, help center and forum will keep you up to date with all things possible in the platform. If you want to check it out for yourself, just head to squarespace.com/MarcusHouse and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You'll find that link in the description below. So yes, SpaceX are screaming along with the progress on Ship 21. It'll be the second orbit-capable Starship produced by SpaceX, and it should be launched on Booster 5, which is also the second flight-capable Super Heavy. In the mid-bay, Ship 21's forward dome section was stacked on the common dome, completing the stack of the liquid methane tank. We also had an amazing view of what seemed to be Ship 21's nose cone, packed with an almost complete set of thermal protection system tiles. It seems to me like SpaceX has learned a lot about installing them for the first time on Ship 20. They look here a lot more uniform and flush. Let's hope that this suffers less tile ejection problems than Ship 20. Meanwhile, both Booster 5's forward dome section and the liquid oxygen tanks are in the high bay and are ready for stacking. Although a lot of work is still left to get both of the vehicles ready for flight, we can expect that both Ship 21 and Booster 5 will be ready to roll out and be flight ready before the end of this year. Pretty crazy to think that SpaceX is almost ready with their second set of orbital vehicles. But wait, there is also more. The production of Booster 6 is also underway, with its aft dome being placed onto a sleeving stand, where it was then sleeved later on. We also saw the delivery of a crucial component of Booster number 9, with its thrust puck being delivered on Sunday. This amazing shot by Boca Chica Gal with NASA spaceflight shows that this puck looks almost exactly the same as with Booster 8's, with the capability to install 13 Raptor engines in the inner ring. This again increases that Raptor count to 33, and just a reminder that Booster 4 only has the 29 engines for the first orbital flight test. Okay, so exciting times ahead once again with SpaceX's Crew Dragon Endurance Crew 3 mission. That's actually tomorrow based on the release date of this video, so very exciting. Upon arrival at the International Space Station, there will of course be an initial overlap with Crew 2 to hand over to the new crew members. Crew 2 will then head home for splashdown in early to mid-November. In what will be a standard long duration stay of 6 months on board the International Space Station, Crew 3 will return home around late April of 2022. So as we prepare to cover this mission for you, I thought it would be timely to cover just who are Crew 3. First off, we have the mission commander Raja Shari. He joined the astronaut candidate training program in 2017. As a decorated colonel in the Air Force, he has over 2,000 hours of flight experience with a bachelor's degree in astronautical engineering and engineering science. Something tells me he's going to be very busy up there. Dr. Thomas Mashburn is on his third flight to space and is the pilot for this mission. He was selected by NASA in 2004 and completed his astronaut candidate training 2 years after that. He has a Bachelor of Science in Physics, a Master's in Engineering Physics, a medical doctorate, and a Master's in Medical Science. So yeah, a bit of an underachiever, is he? Previous missions include STS-127 in 2009, and this also included an emergency spacewalk of over 5.5 hours to replace a faulty ammonia pump. He also launched from Baikonur in 2013, where he was part of Expedition 34 and 35 alongside others like Chris Hadfield. With all those missions under his belt, he accumulated over 146 days in space. So having flown on Shuttle, Soyuz and shortly Dragon, he's going to be an even more accomplished astronaut. We have Kayla Barron, who joins the team as a mission specialist, and like Raja, she joins the astronaut candidate class in 2017. A graduate of the US Naval Academy, earning a bachelor's degree in systems engineering, and with a degree in nuclear engineering, she's a true role model to other young ladies looking to get a career in the space program. Then finally we have Matthias Mulder, who will be acting as the second mission specialist. He actually is only the second European Space Agency astronaut to participate in NASA's Commercial Crew program, and he is known as a bit of an inventor. He holds over 10 patents as well as multiple engineering diplomas in materials science. Professionally, he has served as a paramedic, a junior scientist and a project engineer, a most deserving addition to the crew there for sure. So yes, Raja, Matthias and Kayla are all on their first flights as astronauts, and as we've seen in past missions, once an astronaut passes the 100-kilometre Kármán line, they will earn their golden astronaut pin. I'm wondering if we will once again see a triple gold pin ceremony as Dragon chases down the International Space Station. Now, last Sunday, Ariane 5 jumped off the pad for the last time before the much-anticipated James Webb Space Telescope launch. What you see here is most likely a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 1.5. This is a similar target value to what Elon Musk wants to achieve with a full-stack Starship. Ariane 5 achieves this with the help of the two very powerful solid rocket boosters, which provides over 90% of the thrust at liftoff. This means over 1,000 metric tons of force are provided by the massive solid rocket boosters, while the cryogenic engine of the core stage is bringing around 100 metric tons of force to the table. Now, the payload, which is in this case 2 satellites, has a combined mass of 10.3 metric tons, with the destination being a geostationary transfer orbit. These were SES-17 for civilian communication and Syracuse 4A for the French military. Most interesting, I think, was that the combined mass of both of these satellites is the heaviest payload to be ever launched into such an orbit. The upper stage has to add around 2.4 kilometers per second of velocity to the already incredibly fast 7.8 kilometers per second needed for low Earth orbit. Hey, that's fast enough to get from LA to San Francisco in just a tad more than a minute. Wow, that is pretty awesome. But why a geostationary transfer orbit? Well, many satellites are placed in what's called a geostationary orbit. It's an orbit nearly 36,000 kilometers above the Earth, and the cool thing about this type of orbit is that its required velocity is so low that a satellite takes exactly 1 day to complete a full orbit. This means that if you are standing on the ground, the satellite sits in a stationary position, never moving in the sky. This is perfect, of course, for satellite dishes to continually point at, and it's very different to, say, Starlink, which has many satellites passing rapidly overhead, requiring phased array antennas to continually switch focus to the most appropriate satellite. The latency differences, of course, between the two types of satellite are obviously vastly different. Now, some quite breaking news this week with a consortium of industry groups announcing their intent to develop a commercial space station called Orbital Reef. Led by Blue Origin, Sierra Space and Boeing, the aim is to provide a low Earth orbit research facility capable of fulfilling a wide spectrum of customer needs. This outpost is to be for all of humanity, regardless of visitor country of origin, and this proposal really aims to open up space for all. From research, manufacturing, filming and a host of other reasons to visit, this is one venture sure to harness great interest. Now, Blue Origin will construct some modules and they will expect their New Glenn rocket to do the heavy lifting. Boeing is going to contribute science modules and the Starliner capsule will ferry crew and cargo back and forward. Sierra Space will provide modules to serve as the main living quarters, and potentially also it looks like their Dream Chaser spaceplane could have a role ferrying crew and cargo as well. So yes, what does all this mean? The announcement of Orbital Reef is in response, of course, to NASA's Low Earth Orbit Destinations program. NASA's future research and technology development requirements come at a massive cost, and finding a cheaper way to achieve these objectives means opening up the opportunities in space to commercial entities just like this. Governments have, of course, funded space ventures over many decades. So far, that has been a very conservative approach, with humanity restricted to activities close to home or low Earth orbit. Of course, after the retirement of the space shuttle, 9 years passed with the United States having zero capability to get humans into orbit without the aid of Russia's Soyuz. Thanks to SpaceX's new Crew Dragon making its first launch last year, that has thankfully changed, and it's also spurred on a huge push by many other commercial entities. So yes, a successful bid by the group led by Blue Origin should mean a small amount of funding assistance to study and develop a habitat that can be used once the International Space Station is retired from service. Interestingly, the second stage of this bidding process doesn't begin until around 2025, where a NASA certification is then involved. So confidence is so high at being one of the winning round one bidders, the consortium of companies linked to Orbital Reef are heavily investing right now in development. A huge proportion of the development funding will be from the consortium itself. This is a very brave step indeed, and it's great to see them putting some money where their mouth is. The timeline is such that they will aim to have a commercial station ready for consideration by the time the round 2 certification program begins. I guess the logic here is that this will allow time for certification, launch and assembly in orbit, with a nice time buffer before retirement of the International Space Station itself. That is currently estimated to be sometime around 2030. Of course, Orbital Reef is not alone. Just 4 days prior to this announcement here, NanoRacks, Voyager Space and Lockheed Martin revealed their plans for a private station called Starlab. In previous episodes, we've also covered Axiom Space, and their intention is to berth modules to the International Space Station in the nearer future. In that case, their modules will serve as a core of a new commercial space station, allowing for the eventual retirement of the current station, which would detach and presumably drop into the atmosphere for a fiery demise. I like that with all these proposed station options that we essentially have several private sector facilities that could be operational in the future. So saying all that, it would be nice to see some more evidence to take all of this seriously. There's also a huge regulatory approval process to go through. With the slowness of various bodies out there regulating such things, it seems hard to see such a launch cadence with frequent fights from all of these launch providers. I can't help but agree with Elon Musk here, essentially saying the current regulatory structure for rocket launches is simply outdated. So yes, there we go, another week of space, and you are all caught up now. I think it's amazing that there is so much future enthusiasm for all things space right now, and it seems to be only accelerating even more every month. I look forward to a time where it could be a reasonably affordable exercise to experience microgravity in orbit, visit a commercial space station, or even have a career supporting off-world industries. Asteroid mining, moon colonies, Mars settlements, you name it. But for this, launch costs need to go down significantly, and that is what this is all about. I'm interested in your thoughts on this actually. We have so much potential with Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos being literally the two that have the most asset base behind them to do all of these incredible things. In one case we have Musk just trying to have approvals to get it done, and Bezos who, well, likes to promise a lot of stuff and show a lot of nice pictures, but is still to get anything to orbit. It's great to dream big, but yeah, at the same time, maybe also finish off that vehicle and launch something so that the industry takes it a little more seriously. I'd just love to see that, that is for sure. Also, last week, Ellie in Space interviewed me about the channel here and what I do. I don't often talk about myself, so if you want to check that out, you can do so from the card popping up in the top right here. She put it together really nicely on her channel, and thanks for reaching out there, Ellie. Awesome chatting with you. Thanks very much for watching all the way through here. That means a lot, and it certainly helps to show YouTube that you value the content. If you happen to be a YouTube member or a patron supporter, oh wow, am I grateful for you all being here with us. That midweek video that we published on Tuesday was a big labour of love from the whole team, something that is pretty much entirely funded by that support alone. If you missed that one, there is a card popping up here right now. It's a little technical, so don't let that scare you off. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas there about a Mars return mission before refilling systems even exist on the planet itself, so check that out. If you like the design of this shirt that I'm wearing right here, you can pick that up from the links below. Yet another great way to support what we do here, and remember that shipping takes a little longer around the Christmas period, so you want to get that underway right now. That comes in a reversed version as well for light colours, or even without the logo or the text if you prefer it that way. No matter how you support what I do here, it is very awesome of you. If you'd like to help as well, you can join as a YouTube member via the join button below, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/MarcusHouse. Either of those options gives you access to chat to us more directly via the linked roles on our Discord server. You can also have your names listed right here like these other amazing people, and you also get earlier and ad-free access to the videos to watch before anyone else gets them. Thanks to the production crew helping me with scripting and editing, I'm so thrilled to have such a great bunch of people working with me, very talented individuals. If you're interested in these topics and you would like to keep up to date, remember to follow here below and on Twitter at MarcusHouse. In the tile in the bottom left today we have that midweek video. In the top right is my latest video, and in the bottom right, content that YouTube has selected from the channel just for you. Thank you everyone as always for watching all this way through, and we'll see you all in the next video.
GoDaddy is trusted by over 20 million customers. Start for free at godaddy.com/sell.
This video is supported by CuriosityStream. Hey, Marcus House with you here. You know how SpaceX rapidly stacked Ship 20 for Elon's 2022 presentation before it was rapidly destacked? Well, this week it looks like we have finally progressed further for some more major testing. A beautiful milestone for SpaceX's 20 years of existence just this week. The Space Launch System rolled out of the VAB on its way to the pad on the incredible NASA crawler. Astra roared off the pad again, but did they reach orbit this time? We have a spacewalk on the ISS capturing magnificent footage of Kayla and Raja in action, an update on Mark Vande Heij's return on Soyuz, something that has been getting a lot of attention in the media. Then, of course, Starlink takes flight again as we also explore related news around the network.
You're coming down the ladder now.
We've actually had a lot of activity at Boca Chica this week as SpaceX passes their absolutely incredible 20 years of existence. What achievements will we see SpaceX now in the next 20? Let's just hope they have the approvals to keep innovating at this rapid pace. Speaking of which, we recently saw the booster transport stand with the 2 new alignment pins being moved to the launch site. This has now been placed over near the orbital launch mount where Booster 4 is currently living. Following that, the ship quick disconnect retracted away from Booster 4 last Saturday before another test of the chopsticks. After a round of testing, the ship quick disconnect was re-extended, and the day after, the quick disconnect on the transport stand where Ship 20 was sitting was retracted as well. And that night, the ship was on the move, being rolled over to the chopsticks, positioning itself between the 2 arms. Now, it took a little longer than we expected for the actual lift attempt itself. On Monday, the arms raised up and closed in around, but then it wasn't until dusk on Tuesday that the time finally came. At 6 PM, the quick disconnect arm retracted away from Booster 4, this time in preparation for the lift of the ship. Soon after, the pad was cleared and the stabilisation pins rotated inwards, attaching to the sides right here. Around half an hour later, there it was again, Ship 20 gracefully rising into the arms of Mechazilla for the second time. Not even an hour later, it had been lifted all the way to the top of the tower, swung laterally into place above Booster 4, and then lowered down, reuniting the 2 vehicles once again for the 3rd Starship full stack. That time, by the way, was down from over 3 hours from the first lift using the chopsticks. Also quite interesting, the teams managed to stack the vehicles this time without the aid of the claws that grab onto and stabilise the booster during stacking operations. So yes, it seems as though those claws aren't required, at least in mild weather, and may not be returning anytime soon. A few hours after the stacking of the two vehicles, an umbilical device located on the swing arm extended and connected to Ship 20 to provide power and propellant. This, I think, is quite a nice milestone. Back in early August of 2021 was the first time the ship was fully stacked, of course. Can you believe that that was now over 7 months ago that we first witnessed it? True, it was largely just for show and used this gigantic crane to do the lift. It all seemed crazy fast at the time because the main structure of the tower was still being finalised. Back then, Ship 20 was removed after almost no time at all, with workers then spending several weeks fixing and finishing the vehicle. Largely, it seemed, focusing on repairing the broken thermal protection system tiles. Likewise, Booster 4 was also removed from the orbital launch mount after a few weeks, and then it took another 3 months to reach test readiness. Following the many cryogenic liquid nitrogen tests, in February the Mechazilla system was finally ready to undergo testing, initially practicing with the water balloons before lifting Ship 20 for the second time and placing it onto Booster 4. Once again, largely for show, it seemed, providing the backdrop for Elon Musk's 2022 presentation. Again, this was short-lived and it's been back on the ground ever since, until now. Interestingly, Starship gazers spotted this grid fin on Booster 4 had been rotated early in the week. This is the first time one of them has been moved like that as far as I've seen, so it's great to see some of these mechanisms being tested. On Wednesday though, we saw the very first full stack cryo test. How mind-blowing it was to see that. After the pad was cleared with a lot of venting coming from the orbital tank farm, frost started to form on all 4 of the tanks this time. That began to rise around 10 to 20% of Booster 4's tank and around 25 to 50% on Ship 20 with either liquid nitrogen or a combination of that and liquid oxygen. Just check out this video by Lab Padre of around 10 vents from the ship and booster all going off at exactly the same time. How bonkers was this? Just check this out. So yes, after a successful test, the tanks were emptied and the road was reopened. Over at the build site, after having sections placed inside the high bay but later removed, Booster 8 has begun stacking once again. Its forward dome section was lifted and stacked onto the 3-ring high forward section number 2, bringing it to a total height of 6 rings. Along with that, it had its forward sections number 3 and 4 both spotted. Ship 24's nose cone was seen by Starship gazer with both flap aero covers installed last Saturday, and just a day later it had had its forward flaps installed as well and was later rolled outside of the tent. Now, you may remember last week we talked about Ship 24's nose cone barrel receiving the payload dispenser system. Now though, we can make out what looks to be a cut for a payload door. It was much shorter than the payload door that we saw on the Pathfinder barrel back in January. But Starship is huge and this space is still big enough to deploy a test stack of Starlink satellites. After the first signs of a dome redesign a few weeks back, this week a fully completed dome built from the new press-formed pieces was rolled out, providing us with this great view of how these now look. Not quite as flat as I thought it may have been, but still certainly flatter and with far less pieces. Booster 8's aft section was flipped as well, providing us with this awesome new inside view. You can see here the lower portion of the new liquid oxygen header tank, as well as all that crazy plumbing for 33 engines. Then the wide bay also got just a little higher with these new pieces being added throughout the week. So we had some recent photos from NASA indicating that the lunar Starship development for the human landing system is underway, with astronauts receiving training on how to use the vehicle's crew and cargo elevator. A few important notes from this information. The Starship's extended depot design was revealed, and this ship will feature an extended body, possibly extended tanks and hardware to store fuel for a long period of time. This one will not return to land, but instead remain in space for as long as possible as a refilling station. Also, an updated HLS land design was revealed, very similar compared to the most recent update. However, the solar panels seem to be missing. Is that just because they forgot to put them on the render, or are they perhaps now retractable panels again? Your guess is as good as mine. What is good to see is a Starship airlock and elevator prototype being revealed here, showing some great progress on the Starship crew systems. Thanks to NASA spaceflight's latest flyover in Florida, we can now see that the first tower section being built at Roberts Road has gained another pillar, and parts for other sections can be seen as well. This video also includes pictures of the support base of the launch tower at 39A, as well as updates from the production facility being built at Roberts Road to construct Starship vehicles. It's just amazing to have all of this coverage, and along with NASA spaceflight, our thanks goes out to other dedicated photographers such as Greg Scott, Starship Gazer, RGV Aerial Photography and Lab Padre, to just name a few. The community would be hugely disadvantaged without all of these people involved, so thanks to you, of course. Without your support, no one has the ability to do any of it, and that of course selfishly includes me. With you watching each Saturday, clicking and sharing things, really appreciate it. That 400,000 mark is so close, but haven't quite been able to nail it yet. Hopefully soon. Another huge milestone for NASA with the Space Launch System finally rolling out of the monstrous vehicle assembly building late this week. This is of course a brand new rocket, having never flown before, but it incorporates a lot of legacy hardware from the Space Shuttle program. We have the 4 Aerojet Rocketdyne RS-25 engines installed on the first stage, which were originally used as Space Shuttle main engines. Sadly, however, all of these are now single-use only and will be ditched in the ocean with the majority of the rocket. We've seen these 4 engines roaring together during the static fires, but we've never actually seen any more than 3 at a time used for a launch before. That alone makes anticipation of this launch super exciting, but in this case that is just the tip of the iceberg. This colossal rocket has been promised now for over 2 decades, and to finally see it rolled out to pad 39B truly felt like an era-defining moment. I've always found it a kind of odd mashup of an Apollo-style rocket combined with a bunch of space shuttle tech, and Artemis I should be ready to take us back out to deep space, and I just can't wait. First though, the slow journey to the launch complex 6.8 kilometers away from the VAB, and then the wet dress rehearsal test, which NASA says is scheduled to happen around 2 weeks after it arrives. Once completed successfully, that's the point where NASA should be able to finally provide an accurate estimated launch date. Amazing news for Astra this week after a successful mission. Their first launch was attempted on Monday, which was aborted due to weather conditions, but on Tuesday, Rocket 3.3 roared off from the pad at Kodiak, Alaska. I'll jump into that in just a moment, but before that, a big thank you to Curiosity Stream for supporting this video. This terrific subscription streaming service provides thousands of award-winning documentaries. Of course, if you are anything like me, the space-related content such as this great documentary talking about the Mars Perseverance rover will catch your eye immediately. I've been following Perseverance and Ingenuity this entire time, and it is just incredible to see that everything has really gone to plan with this mission. This episode of Breakthrough lets us meet Perseverance in greater detail. As it continues into its already very successful mission, relive how it got there, its re-entry into the atmosphere of Mars, and the engineering that will hopefully allow us to answer that very important question: did life once exist on the red planet? Ancient rivers and vast lakes now gone may hold the silent signs of past life, but will that silence soon be broken? The Perseverance rover is diligently hunting for Martian life while also supporting the first ever helicopter on Mars. This is a story that we continue to see being played out each month. You may also be interested in the colossal library outside of space content. There is all sorts of stuff: history, nature, food, travel, science and technology, and you can even stream it all worldwide anytime on a range of supported devices. Give it a try by heading to curiositystream.com/MarcusHouse. With that, you can sign up for access for just $14.99 for the entire year. You'll find that link in the description below. So yes, Tuesday, Rocket 3.3 launched from the pad. The stream was all covered by Thomas Burkhardt with NASA Spaceflight, along with Carolina Grossman from Astra. This flight, LV0009, sitting here on the pad, nicely frosted up and awaiting go time before it launched into the clear evening sky. It's always a great experience watching a relatively brand new rocket attempt a mission like this. This was a southern launch heading into a sun synchronous orbit, just a little over 520 kilometers in altitude. This is a very handy orbit that processes through one complete revolution each year, so that the orbital plane is always following the sun. It is especially useful for Earth imaging and stuff like that, where you want the light to cast shadows at the same angle each day. So yes, it's been an interesting ride for Astra with their sideways launch in August last year. That one didn't make it. Their first successful flight to orbit in November of 2021, followed by the flight last month with the failure of the second stage deployment causing a loss of mission. The big question was, could LV0009 make it to orbit? The flight looked beautiful right through launch, and 3 minutes in, the nail-biting main engine cut off of the 5 Delphin engines, and there we had it, a clean fairing separation and off with the second stage. After achieving orbit, the deployment remained slightly in question, with the stream ending fairly rapidly. Shortly after though, a new stream popped up with the excited Chris Kemp joining to announce that they had indeed had a successful deployment.
These guys have worked hard for this. This has not been easy. We had a flight just over a month ago, and the team worked really hard every day, every weekend, many nights to quickly identify the issues that we had on the flight, get another rocket back up to Kodiak and fly it, and it was absolutely the right thing to do.
All 3 of these payloads were organised by Spaceflight Inc. And yes, check out NASA Spaceflight's full article here for more detail on each of those. Huge congrats to the team at Astra for the second successful mission to orbit. The hard work has paid off, and very best of luck for the next mission. A quick update with the James Webb Space Telescope. The mirror alignment is going beautifully because on March the 11th, the Webb team completed the fine phasing of alignment, which was just the next step after the coarse phasing I talked about a few weeks ago. This means that every optical parameter that has been checked and tested is performing at or above expectations, and this image right here is a test case being used for the alignment evaluation. Now, all of the primary mirror segments have been adjusted to produce this one unified image of the exact same star. It's very different to what we saw a few weeks ago. This is just a test image, but it's only using the NearCam instrument, not the main near-infrared camera yet to be tested. But with this alone, just look at this. It's so sensitive already that all of the galaxies and stars are obvious here in the background. We are going to learn so much from this marvel of engineering. A beautiful spacewalk this week too. NASA astronauts Kayla Barron and Raja Shari suited up and exited the International Space Station to assemble and install new brackets and struts for the next set of solar array upgrades. Kayla was suited up with the red stripes and Raja with no stripes at all, which just helps to determine who is who while watching the stream. There's a link to the full replay of that in the description, by the way. Now, this was a reasonably lengthy walk at 6 hours and 54 minutes, so almost 7 hours, and that was the first for Raja Shari, with it being the second spacewalk for Kayla. Everything went to plan with the major objectives being completed, and there is actually another spacewalk scheduled in on Wednesday this coming week on March the 23rd, so expect some more action on that soon. Speaking of the ISS, one of the more pressing updates I thought I should share relates to Mark Vande Hei, who was to return on the Soyuz. Now, there has been so much speculative news articles out there a week ago, very worried about Mark and whether he would be able to still return with the other cosmonauts on board the Soyuz on March the 30th. Now, much of this was fired up by a video posted by a Russian state news outlet showing Mark being left behind on the International Space Station, and then the station itself being split apart from the Russian segment. That certainly got a lot of attention, but we actually want to know some useful, accurate information. Now, the good news is that NASA has answered this question, saying that there is no change of plan and that everybody involved is working together well. Sanity at least prevails currently when it comes to the amazing space station, a feat of engineering that to me is an incredible example of international cooperation and skill. I don't think anyone wants to see that tarnished. Now, this return event on March 30 is going to be significant as well. It will play out as other Soyuz mission returns do, touching down in Kazakhstan. A bunch of employees from NASA will be there waiting to check out Mark's condition and head back to Houston. Now, this is critical, especially with this mission as it is for any. However, this is a special one for one particular reason. Mark is completing 355 consecutive days on the station, and that, by the way, means that he breaks the record for the longest spaceflight by an American astronaut. That includes, of course, Scott Kelly, who had 340 days, so I can't wait to see those scenes. Of course, just because there seems to be no issue with this return of Soyuz, that doesn't mean that it is all smooth sailing for other missions that we're flying in the near future. I talked a little about OneWeb last week. There are plenty more flights that need a new ride to space, as shown here by Space News. There are 16 flights listed here that are not Russian missions, and 6 of those is for OneWeb, who were wanting to deploy a few hundred satellites this year. Now the problem is that there are not a lot of rockets available for these missions outside of Soyuz. It could be possible to fly a few Atlas V missions, but as far as I'm aware, all remaining flights are allocated before that rocket is retired. Ariane Space's Ariane 5 rocket is also being phased out, so not sure if they could pick up any more of these. There is the H-2A rocket with JAXA, but I think even that is being phased out fairly quickly with the H-3 in development right now. As far as I could see, there was no room left for new flights to be added to the queue. Whether there are options available from the Chinese or Indian Space Agency, I couldn't quite determine, but who else does that leave? Yep, you guessed it. If you think SpaceX's launch cadence has been elevated recently, which is certainly true, well, perhaps we may be seeing even more options for some of these missions to fly on Falcon 9. I mean, all of this comes at a super inconvenient time because many space agencies are creating their new rockets and phasing out the old ones. You have Vulcan Centaur replacing Atlas, but of course you need some engines first. Speaking of Blue Origin, New Glenn is in its early development as well. Likewise Ariane 6, and then you have Starship of course. So yes, this is a very strange transitional time. Now, SpaceX just over the last day launched the 11th flight in 11 weeks for 2022 from Slick 40, an evening launch this time, and off it launched with 49 Starlink version 1.5 satellites. On top of this, a record-breaking booster reuse milestone with booster 1051 flying for the 12th time. A beautiful flight, stage separation and fairing jettison. We even got some nice clear footage of the booster landing to a point before that cut out, but there we have it, the first ever 12th landing. The Starlink deployment almost an hour into the mission as well, and only a small glimpse of that one with the ground station coverage dropping. So yes, another successful mission. Speaking of Starlink though, it is worth diving a little further into this article that I really only showed a snapshot of in last week's video. The US Space Command has been appearing very pro-Starlink with the results from the network in Ukraine. General James Dickinson stated that what we're seeing with Elon Musk and the Starlink capabilities is really showing us what a mega constellation or a proliferated architecture can provide in terms of redundancy and capability. That is very high praise in my opinion, given that there are around 2,000 satellites now in orbit. That is not just the largest satellite constellation by a little bit, it absolutely blows any other network out of the water. Many thousands more are expected to be added over time, of course, with permission to launch 12,000 total right now, and SpaceX wants approval to launch a lot more than that. How many will ever be simultaneously in orbit we are still not overly sure of, but it will certainly be much larger than it is today. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Department of Defense is investing in this technology with SpaceX already. It could be a core reason why this tweet right here is more significant than it may have first appeared. What I think is interesting about this whole story is that SpaceX were actually trying to get permission to have the Starlink service activated in Ukraine for months. While speaking at the California Institute of Technology, Gwen Shotwell said that SpaceX had been working on trying to get permission and landing rights to lay down capacity in Ukraine, adding that they had been working with the Ukrainians for a month and a half or so. Although they had been waiting for a formal acceptance, the tweets between Fedorov and Musk on the 26th of February were essentially permission enough, it seems, with the Starlink service being immediately switched on and more antennas on the way. Plenty more have been delivered since then, as we spoke about in previous videos. Just midweek, another massive shipment arrived as tweeted here. Shotwell said that this was the right thing to do, and it is the best way to uphold democracies to make sure that we all understand what the truth is. So that does it again for another week. I'll be back again next Saturday. As always, you make this channel what it is. You, the community, and everybody that is thrilled by all things rockets. And hey, if you need some new gear to wear, well, you've always got this merch that you can pick up here, similar to Jana here, wearing the design at Boca Chica in front of Starship in August last year. A huge thanks to all of you amazing patrons and YouTube members here scrolling by. Just look at all of you. I'm so honoured that you love what I do so much to throw a few dollars at us each month. You have no idea how much that helps the team and I out. If you would also like to support and get some ad-free video releases before anyone else gets them, and to get some extra Discord perks as well, the links are below. As always, the tile in the bottom left today here will take you back to the video from last week if you missed it. Loads packed into that one. In the top right is my latest video, and in the bottom right a YouTube selected video. Thank you everyone for watching all this way through, and I'll see you in the next video. This video is supported by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for your online presence. Hey, Marcus House with you here. Yet another crazy week of awesome space news to cover today. Not just all the huge progress during the week with Starship development, but so much more to catch up on outside of that as well. We have the SLS wet dress rehearsal updates, Friday's launch of 4 private astronauts to the International Space Station with Axiom Space on Crew Dragon. Amazon has announced 83 rocket launches for Project Kuiper, their broadband satellite constellation. Rocket Lab assisted Black Sky to set a company record, and astounding findings from Hubble. Firstly, an interesting piece of unintentional Starship development news this week coming out of the orbital launch pad at Florida. On Tuesday night, SpaceX shared a photo of the Falcon 9 and Dragon vertical at pad 39A for the launch of Axiom 1. Now, I'll cover that later in the video, but if you zoom right in here to the background, you may notice the Starship pad under those bright spotlights. Just next to the Falcon 9, you can see a foundation for the base of the orbital launch tower under construction. And then right beside that, you can see what is possibly the groundbreaking for the orbital launch mount 2. Now, at Starbase in Texas, in a newly released letter, the site expansion plan application previously filed with the US Army Corps of Engineers in 2021 were withdrawn, citing a lack of documentation from SpaceX and their decision to establish launch facilities at Kennedy Space Center. That expansion at the launch site would have included Orbital Launch Mount B, another landing pad, and much more. In his tweet from Mauricio of RGV Aerial Photography showing where the proposed expansion would be, SpaceX does have the option to reapply, but I don't think that would happen anytime soon with the lack of launch approval from the FAA so far, and with them ramping up the launch site at Florida. Speaking of which, Greg Scott and Farial took another flight at the Cape. It is worth noting first that the new flight restrictions here limit how close that they can get to Roberts Road, but at this distance we can still see a lot. The third level of the Starship's next orbital launch tower is now vertical and almost complete, with more sections ready to go. If we zoom right in here, you can even see that at least 2 or perhaps even 3 more pads for the tower segment construction have now appeared. It could be that they are building 9 or 10 of these pads in total. Take a look at this though. The ground and the foundation work here is what also blows my mind. SpaceX are making massive, rapid progress here. It is super handy being able to see these perspectives, so if you can, do support these flights here with Greg Scott. It helps a huge amount. So yes, digging into the updates at Starbase, last week after being moved to the launch site, Booster 7 was hooked up to the crane right beside the booster testing stand dubbed the Can Crusher. It looked as though it would go up on that stand for its first big test. However, it seemed that plans had changed right after, as it was disconnected from the crane so that both could individually roll over to the orbital launch pad. From here, Booster 7 was again hooked up to the crane that night. The next morning, it was carefully lifted up out of the booster transport stand, was raised up into the air, and then moved over to the orbital launch mount. It was then gently lowered into the launch ring ahead of the initial testing. During that lift, Nick with NASA Spaceflight captured this great shot that allowed us to see partially into the skirt. Now, what is immediately obvious is that all of the Raptor plumbing, the wiring, and the gimbal hardware is on the booster already, which should make it easier for Raptor 2 installation. With this version of the engine being simplified from Raptor 1, it's going to be interesting to see how rapidly they can attach them this time. On Sunday afternoon, the booster quick disconnect was attached to Booster 7, and that evening the LR11000 crane was detached from the vehicle. Monday morning, the pad was cleared of personnel and the tank farm was spooled up ready for testing. At 3 p.m. local time, frost formed on the upper stage as it was filled with liquid nitrogen. Soon after, the bottom tank started frosting up as well. I think what was most astounding though was this. Just over an hour later, Booster 7 had both its liquid oxygen and methane tanks completely filled in this cryogenic test. This is the very first time, by the way, that the booster has been filled up to the brim on both tanks like this. Now we can compare this to Booster 4's latest cryo test that had its liquid oxygen tank full, but its methane tank only about halfway. After around an hour of Booster 7 tanks being completely full, the booster started to detank and the frost levels went down. After depressurizing the tanks late into the night, the event was concluded after quite an impressive day of testing. Now, the alignment pins that were on Booster 4's transport stand were moved over to Booster 7's transport stand this week. Now, I think that these alignment pins will possibly be required when a booster is moved in and out of the stand when using the tower arms. This is because when the clamps on the stand let go of the booster, there is really nothing stopping it from swaying back and forth. These pins are very necessary as SpaceX can't afford to damage the bells of the 20 engines on the outer ring of the booster. The pins can raise up and down and slide in and out so that they can slot into the two sockets on either side of the booster here. With both of the tower arms and the alignment pins, it should eliminate the need for having a dozen workers holding onto the booster using guide ropes like this, something that I doubt is even allowed if the booster is under the arms of the chopsticks anyway. Thanks a heap to the amazing Ryan Hansen Space for putting this together. Much more information on his channels are coming soon, so do stay tuned for that. On Tuesday, Nick shared an announcement that was heard over the PA system saying that SpaceX were clearing the pad for rigging and crane operations. The crane was soon hooked up to the ship quick disconnect umbilical arm on the orbital launch tower, which is responsible for delivering the propellant into the ship. That piece of equipment was soon lowered to the ground, and we suspect it is because it would need to be altered to accommodate the changes for Ship 24 and onwards. We know that the quick disconnect plate is one ring higher and would almost certainly have an evolved design. Midweek, the cam crusher was offloaded from the self-propelled modular transporters and placed onto the ground. Just yesterday, Booster 7 was lifted off the orbital launch mount by the crane and then lowered down to be placed onto that cam crusher. It's going to be interesting to see if some testing occurs here soon or if this is just a temporary resting place. Over at the production site on Sunday night, Ship 24's aft section was picked up in front of Tent 3 and moved inside. The next day, it emerged out of the other end of the tent, was moved into the high bay, and then lifted up by the bridge crane. It was mated to the top of Booster 8's forward section for a fit check to ensure that the pins and the slots fit together as required. Early the next morning, it was destacked from the booster, lowered to the ground, and a few hours later, Ship 24's common dome and middle liquid oxygen assembly that was stacked in the mid bay at the end of February was moved over to the high bay, lifted up by the bridge crane, and then stacked onto that same aft section. A week ago, Booster 8's aft section number 2 was lifted into the high bay with its common dome section following it in the next day. It was promptly lifted up by the bridge crane and stacked onto that aft section, which now begins that oxygen tank assembly, now 8 out of 24 rings tall. Fully stacked Booster 8 in the very near future. A newly spotted thrust dome for either Booster 9 or perhaps even Booster 7.1's test tank was lifted into the sleeving stand early in the week, which was sleeved with the usual 4 stack of the slightly shorter rings. We also saw a booster header tank sporting a capped downcomer pipe here showing up. This, I suspect, could be a test tank for the newly designed liquid oxygen header tank in the boosters that we've seen on Booster 7 and Booster 8. So yes, such rapid production work going on here with all that activity, and as always, many of these production updates are beautifully shown in Brendan's latest production diagram, so do go and check out those on his Twitter account and subscribe to his feed there to stay up to date. That support really helps him to do what he's doing there, and of course that same support is hugely useful for the channel right here too, so grateful to all of you for following what we do here each Saturday. Well, it is time for some updates on the SLS wet dress rehearsal. Last week, of course, everything was scheduled to largely be tested out on Saturday and Sunday, the 2nd and 3rd of April. Now that certainly didn't go all as smoothly as we would have liked. NASA's Space Launch System recently rolled out to Launch Pad 39B to prepare for its last major test before the first ever launch, the Artemis I mission. Now this is a super critical mission, of course, as it will be the first integrated flight test of NASA's deep space exploration system, and that includes not only the SLS itself, but the Orion spacecraft and the ground systems at the pad. This final stage of the wet dress rehearsal process was a full propellant load test and a practice countdown, essentially almost everything but firing up the engines. So why wasn't it the smooth process that we were looking for? I'll jump into that in just a moment, but first a huge thank you to Squarespace today for their support of this video. Remember when you needed an expensive web developer to get a simple website up and running? Well, no more. It is simple to get started using Squarespace with a bunch of great mobile responsive templates to match your brand. You could be building a simple portfolio site to showcase your work history, it could be a simple blog, or even an online store. Squarespace does all of the e-commerce security and setup for you without the need for separate and sometimes expensive payment gateways. You'll find all the necessary tools that you need to get your site up and running super quickly. Once you are live, you can get wonderful insights into your site traffic, including where users are visiting from and how those users are interacting with your content. You can find out how many views you are getting, the time users are spending on the site, overall audience location, and much more. To get your site started, you can open up a free trial, and you don't even need to enter credit card details to do it. If you want to check it out for yourself, just head to squarespace.com/MarcusHouse and save 10% off the first purchase of a website or domain. You'll find that link in the description below. So yes, why wasn't the wet dress rehearsal a smooth process? Well, firstly, the weather did have a little to do with the initial delays, with 4 lightning strikes detected at the pad on Sunday last week, one of them which actually hit the tower itself. Yikes! The following day on Sunday, the tanking test was abandoned after a fan pressurization issue on the mobile launcher. This, of course, caused safety concerns with ground support equipment. That issue was quickly resolved though, and the test was pushed back the next day. On Monday, the plan was to quickly load around 700,000 gallons of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen propellant into the core stage. Initially, there was a delay of several hours loading liquid oxygen due to a temperature limit issue. Once resolved, the liquid oxygen tank was filled to around 50%. When NASA was preparing to load the liquid hydrogen though, a panel problem on the mobile launcher was spotted which halted the test. That panel controls the vent valve of the core stage, which relieves pressure during the tanking process. So yes, all these tests were necessary, and it was good that none of these issues were too detrimental. In fact, it is good to see that the problems were not so much with the launch vehicle itself, but instead the ground support equipment. The delays have caused those unintentional consequences though, such as pushing back the launch of SpaceX's Axiom 1 mission 3 times. Following that mission, around April the 20th, from the exact same launch pad, is the Crew 4 mission, sending 4 crew to the ISS. Now this leads us of course to the incredible mission on Friday to launch 4 private astronauts to the International Space Station on behalf of Axiom Space. Now I think there are a bunch of new interesting milestones with this mission. As is well reported, it is the first dedicated completely private trip to the International Space Station. Don't let that fool you though. There is a lot of experience here. Retired NASA astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria is the commander, and he has flown to the space station before and flown in the space shuttle 3 times previously in total. A pretty impressive track record alone, and he's done 10 separate spacewalks, which I believe is still the current record for a NASA astronaut. A picture-perfect liftoff and the 5th flight of this particular Falcon 9 booster. I found it again most interesting that the signal coverage for the drone ship landing was completely uninterrupted for the always incredible pinpoint landing out in the Atlantic Ocean. The drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas there for the platform for this awesomeness, didn't appear to even break its link once, which still seems a little unusual. We also have on board Larry Connor, Eitan Stebby and Mark Pathy, who each apparently paid $55 million for their seats. As the crew have collectively stated many times in the media, this is no tourism mission. There is a great deal of science and research to be done on this flight. As stated by the crew, they've also spent between 750 and 1,000 hours just in training alone to prepare, and they're going to be conducting 25 different experiments on the ISS. At the time of editing, the SpaceX Dragon capsule was still on its way to the International Space Station and set to dock there at the day of this upload on April the 9th. Very best of luck for this mission. I'm certainly hoping Axiom Space gets all that they need out of this mission prior to launching their own space station in the future, which is imaginatively called Axiom Station. It's going to be a blast watching this mission play out. Some pretty amazing news coming out of Amazon this week. The company has announced what may very well be the biggest commercial procurement of rocket launches ever. Well, assuming of course that you don't count SpaceX launching their own Starlink satellites. These launches are all for Amazon's Project Kuiper, another low Earth orbit satellite network that will be made up of 3,236 satellites, all designed to provide broadband to communities around the world. 3 separate agreements have been signed already, including 38 separate launches on ULA's Vulcan Centaur rocket, 18 launches on Ariane Space's Ariane 6, and then, well, 12 on Blue Origin's New Glenn. I know, right? Who would have guessed that? Of course, all 3 of these rockets are still in development and yet to fly, with Ariane 6 and ULA's Vulcan Centaur possibly making their first flight late this year, or possibly more likely in 2023. Then Blue Origin's New Glenn seems unlikely to fly any commercial payloads before 2023 or even 2024. So yes, this is also on top of an earlier agreement with ABL Space Systems for 2 launches of the RS-1 for 2 test satellites that are planned to launch by the 4th quarter this year, and also the existing 9 Atlas V launches with ULA of operational satellites. With all the 77 operational launches with the new contract, it's likely going to cost the company a minimum of $10 billion before accounting for the cost of the Kuiper satellites or the payload adapters themselves. According to Michael Sheets, Vulcan Centaur will launch 45 satellites per launch, New Glenn will launch 61, and Ariane 6 will launch 35 to 40. This is a total of 3,400 satellites, averaging roughly $3 million to launch each satellite. Of course, it is interesting just to run the numbers if they flew with SpaceX in some kind of upside-down universe. With Falcon 9 as an obvious much cheaper option, it is possible that it could launch 30 Kuiper satellites per launch for an average cost of $1.7 million per satellite. Much cheaper, and that doesn't even consider SpaceX's Starship, which will more than likely begin commercial launches well before New Glenn. Starship could feasibly carry 100 to 150 Kuiper satellites per launch, and is certainly predicted to cost much less than Falcon 9, despite offering at least 5 times the performance. Rocket Lab had another beautiful night launch just after my video went up last Saturday. This one broke a record too, not for Rocket Lab themselves, but it allowed Black Sky to set a company record of their own. Here we have Electron ready for launch on Pad A from New Zealand at Launch Complex 1 in the super early hours of Sunday, April the 3rd. This was no rideshare mission as many are by Rocket Lab. This was a fully dedicated mission, the 25th Electron launch and the 3rd in a series of 5 launches for Black Sky. This one was named without mission a beat, and sitting on top safely enclosed in the fairings was a modified kick stage with 2 high-resolution Earth observation satellites. Interestingly though, to deploy the satellites here, Rocket Lab had to use a special double stack method as we see here in this image. Pretty cool how these are deployed, which we'll see in a moment. The countdown to launch proceeded without any issues, and Electron roared off the pad at 1:41 AM local time. It lit up the clear night sky with its 9 Rutherford engines rapidly ascending into the darkness, this one heading in a southeasterly trajectory, and moments later main engine cutoff and stage separation followed by fairing jettison. The second stage, powered by a single vacuum optimised Rutherford engine, pushed onwards, delivering the kick stage to its target orbit almost 10 minutes after the launch. Now, due to sensitivity surrounding the payload deployment, there was no live feed of this, so instead we got to see an animation to keep us updated on this part of the mission. The coast phase for the kick stage lasted roughly 50 minutes before one final short duration burn of almost 2 minutes circularised the orbit. Now this here was the intriguing payload deployment. The first of 2 stages was released, followed by the jettison of the payload adapter. Kind of looks like a top hat, doesn't it? Then the second satellite was deployed afterwards. So yes, that now brings the Black Sky satellite constellation up to 14 in total. Another successful mission by Rocket Lab, and Black Sky later took to social media, posting that the team at Rocket Lab had enabled them to deliver the first images and data after a mere 12 hours after the launch. On top of that, of course, even more exciting, the upcoming mission named There and Back Again will be attempting the first full recovery with the booster re-entering, deploying a series of chutes, and then they're going to attempt to capture it by the chopper as seen in early tests. Can't wait for this one, which should be very soon. It's just fantastic, I think, to see just how amazing and frequent these Rocket Lab launch services are. Now, last week the video was so packed with content that I just didn't have time to add this story in, but I've just got to talk about it because I find it simply incredible. On the 30th of March, the Hubble team released this image here. This is the farthest star that we have ever captured. The scientists involved have named this Arendelle, meaning the morning star, and it is estimated to be 12.9 billion light years away. That means the light left the star 12.9 billion years ago, and it is just now reaching us here. That alone is hard to fully comprehend. Now, we don't really know what the exact age of the universe is, but we estimate it to be around 13.7 billion years old, give or take a few 100 million years at most. That means that this star was formed roughly 1 billion years after the birth of the universe itself. Now, what is most odd here is that we couldn't normally see this far away because at these distances, large clusters of galaxies appear only as smudges. So how did we do this? Well, it is all thanks to this gravitational lensing. Between Earth and Arendelle, there is a massive galaxy cluster which bends the fabric of space and time, and this greatly amplifies the light from distant objects behind it, essentially acting like a massive magnifying glass. Now, there is a huge amount of luck in this, of course. For this to happen, the monstrous lens needs to be in perfect alignment with Hubble. Thankfully, it is going to remain in this alignment to be analysed for years to come. Scientists believe that Arendelle was probably entirely made of light gases like hydrogen and helium, and it could also be 50 times the mass of our Sun and millions of times brighter. These are known as population 3 stars and are thought to be the early creators of heavy metal elements. They burn hot and they burn fast, living out their short lives and exploding as a spectacular supernova. In doing so, they hurl heavier elements all across the universe. In fact, I think the mind bender when studying astronomy like this is always the fact that although Arendelle existed 12.2 billion years ago, it would be long gone by now. And the galaxy that contained this star is calculated to now be over 27 billion light years away from our present location in space. I'm sure one of the big goals from the James Webb Space Telescope is to study this star now and to look out for other population 3 stars. I just can't wait to see what more we discover. So yes, it has been quite an eventful week of space news, and then on top of that you have the also interesting non-spacey news going on, such as Musk now being the largest individual shareholder, now holding 9.2% in Twitter. Yep, just lazily picking up over 73 million shares. Musk, of course, has been fairly critical of Twitter recently, so it'll be interesting to see how changes to the platform evolve at this point. Even though Elon has been tweeting polls about an edit option in Twitter, it seems to already be becoming a reality, with Twitter hinting at it at the start of the month. Hopefully this feature allows everyone to at least see the history of the edits though. It's going to be very handy, at least for all of my typos. Musk is also being appointed to the board of Twitter as announced here by Twitter's CEO, so he's going to have quite a lot of influence. So what do you think? Good thing? Bad thing? I'm totally on the fence with this one, to be honest. As always, a big thank you for watching all the way through. It has been another action-packed week of news, and I'll be back again next Saturday. Please do double check that you are still subscribed as well. YouTube has been behaving really weirdly the last few months, so I'm just so grateful to all of you out there helping me do what I do here. It just blows my mind every single week. If you love the content, like my many incredible patrons and YouTube members, every little bit helps, and you can even get those ad-free videos delivered to you before anyone else gets to see them. Likewise, the merch store links below if you want some new gear. All of that helps a heap. In the tile in the bottom left today, we take you back to the video from last week. Along with Starship updates, we had a lot on relativity, space, SLS, and Mark's return to Earth. In the top right is the latest video, and in the bottom right, content that YouTube thinks that you will like from the channel. Thanks as always for watching all this way through. It helps a huge amount. I'll see you all in the next video. This video is supported by Squarespace. Hey, Marcus House with you here. We've got a lot to cover today. The story of the largest rocket to ever be created continues at SpaceX's Starbase, with ship and booster work screaming ahead in preparation for the first static fire and launch. NASA's Capstone mission, which is a lunar pathfinding communications CubeSat, is set to go on board Rocket Lab's Electron. The spacesuit development program finally progresses, with 2 companies now awarded the contracts by NASA this week. We have the Space Launch System wet dress rehearsal ready to go, awesome updates on the James Webb Space Telescope's first targets, and then loads more.
Good deal, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
We'll start off news this week at the orbital launch site at Starbase. Last week we talked about a pop that was heard as a bunch of tiles fell off Starship 24 during testing on Friday the 27th of May. Workers installed a new section of pipe with expansion loops inside the ship early in the week to replace the sections destroyed. Compared to the damaged pipework we saw removed, this new pipework actually has multiple expansion loops in it. This provides much greater flexibility to prevent excessive stresses in the piping system caused by the thermal expansion and contraction. Due to this, I think it is a reasonable assumption that a lack of these loops possibly caused the original pipework to completely break when pressurized. It seems that pipework smashed rather violently against the inside of the payload bay, causing all those tiles to fall off. It didn't take long to solve the problem, however, as we can see from SpaceX's new installation of the pipe. So although many out there may have been announcing this as a failure, it was only really a minor issue, and development has continued essentially unhindered. Ship 24, it seems, should still be the first to attempt flight to orbit. Crews were also seen adding more raceway aero covers over Ship 24's piping and wiring on the side of the vehicle. As with previous prototypes, this is installed to protect all those more delicate systems from the forces of flight and re-entry. On Wednesday, it looked like a cryo test was underway. The road was closed and we soon saw a tank farm starting to vent, but nothing visible seemed to be occurring on the ship itself. The road was reopened later that evening, leaving us scratching our heads, but on Thursday it was a different story. At about 3 PM, another test started and frost began to form on Ship 24's methane tank, and around 15 minutes later frost also started to rise on the liquid oxygen tank as well. Once the tanks were fully frosted up and the test concluded, Elon here tweeted sharing the success of this test. That is great to know, and Ship 24 now moves on to the next phase of testing. Now, some exciting news this week, which many others seem to have labelled as disappointing. I don't see it this way though. After many months of delays, we were expecting to see the release of the final programmatic environmental assessment from the Federal Aviation Administration by the 31st of May. Instead though, we got a more interesting pushback of the target date to June the 13th. Now yes, this is another delay, but this time it is only a 2-week delay instead of another month. You know what I think this means? Yep, the FAA are confident enough that it will be very soon. Now again, I must stress at this point that there is no evidence that the FAA environmental review delay has had significant impact on SpaceX's orbital flight test at Starbase. Booster 4 was not flight worthy. The launch tower was not ready. In fact, we still see work actively going on to prepare for launch, as we will share yet again this week. Parts of the vertical tank farm were not even compliant, needing these pre-certified horizontal tanks installed instead. This is why you haven't seen Musk tweeting out frustration over the FAA process all this time. That, however, could very soon change though, with Elon saying that they will have a full stack on the pad in a few weeks. At this point, if the FAA delays did continue, I'd expect to see some sparks to start flying. In saying this, just a few days after the 2-week delay announcement, the progress of the assessment was updated to show that Section 4F has also concluded on June the 2nd. This should mean that to successfully complete the programmatic environmental assessment for orbital Starship launches, they should just need to process everything into one final draft. Once those documents are complete, approved and published, all that SpaceX will need to begin the test flight is an FAA launch license. So yes, very exciting times ahead. Elon also gave an update on Super Heavy's upcoming static fire campaign, saying that for the initial static fires of Booster 7, SpaceX will light only one Raptor at a time. Now, we've seen those Raptors being delivered and moved into the wide bay for integration over the past few weeks, of course, with another 2 spotted here by RGV Aerial Photography. Musk even confirmed this week that all Raptor 2 engines for Starship's orbital flight demo have been built and are being installed. So yes, let's hope 2 weeks is indeed 2 weeks, because this massive event that we have all been waiting so patiently for is coming real soon. The largest rocket ever constructed, leaving the ground under the mind-bending thrust of 33 Raptor 2 engines. Grid fin installation was underway this week as well, along with more loads of methane deliveries at the launch site continuing. I suspect we are not far off now seeing it rolling down the launch site, hopefully over the next week. RGV Aerial Photography spotted some new armoured plating being prepared for welding onto the orbital launch pad legs. These are certainly needed so that the legs themselves can withstand the heat and the debris from the super heavy booster as it ignites and lifts off. Up the launch tower at the quick disconnect arm, the mechanism that allows the quick disconnect plate to quickly detach to and detach from the ship was tested this week. This has actually had some fairly significant changes to the mechanism itself, and it's the first time that I've seen it in action since it was replaced to fit the updated vehicle design, where the quick disconnect panel is up one ring higher. In this new design, a single hydraulic piston attached to the back of the quick disconnect unit pushes the unit forward during extension and then pulls it back to retract. Additionally, a wishbone structure attached to the underside of the quick disconnect unit assists with keeping the entire unit rigid during this movement. All in all, it's a much simpler and stronger looking mechanism compared to what it was before. Over at the production facility, Booster 8's aft section was rolled into the high bay and lifted up onto the welding turntable for stacking with the rest of the liquid oxygen tank. That night at 2:30 AM, the liquid oxygen tank was indeed hooked up to the bridge crane, lifted up and stacked on top of the aft section for about half an hour before it was pulled back off. Was there a problem going on, we thought, as we scratched our heads. Soon after though, up it went again, this time staying there for an hour before it came down again. So yes, I'm not sure what was going on there. Obviously some sort of issue with the fitting that prevented them from completing the stack that day. Of course, SpaceX did get it there in the end, with it being stacked the next day. So there it is, 24 rings tall, awaiting only the final stacking before its main structure is complete. And then we also have progress with Ship 25 having its second forward flap aero cover being added to its nose. A few days later, the nose was moved over to the low bay for the next step. It wasn't all construction this week either. Destruction too. The rest of the old Ship 16 prototype was finally sliced up, with the aft section fully disassembled. It soon entered Highway 4 and headed off to the scrapyard. Now, last week we saw the crew access arm style office building leaving the Starbase facility, and we were unsure where it was being taken to. Well, thanks again to RGV Aerial Photography's eyes in the sky and his views of the Macy's gun range, we now know where it went. I'm wondering if this may mean that it will be used as a mission control for the upcoming orbital flight test. As far as I can tell, the Stargate building used for this is a little too close to use as mission control for a full stack flight. So for the first week in a while, there have been no Falcon 9 launches. We do have the Nilesat 301 launch coming up, along with Commercial Resupply Service Mission 25 with Cargo Dragon for NASA. Speaking of which, great news this week with SpaceX being awarded another 5 Crew Dragon missions to the International Space Station. That may even be all of the assignments needed to keep the ISS occupied up until 2030. Awesome to see. I must admit though, I've become quite accustomed this year to seeing at least one Falcon 9 landing each week, but no, nothing. Instead, shout out today to the amazing Joe Barnard with his first Scout F launch and landing. He is the master of model rocketry. Just check out this crazy thrust vectoring on the ascent. We have stage separation, and then look at that, almost stuck the landing there on this try as he attempts to bring the future of reusability to model rockets, inspired of course by SpaceX time and time again. If you are not subscribed to his BPS Space channel, you are really missing out. I've tried to get a little model rocket club started here myself. I've just had a little trouble trying to get it off the ground. Yep, subscribe for more crap jokes. Okay, so a mission here that I am so excited to watch is the Capstone mission. More on that in a moment, but first, huge thanks to Squarespace today for supporting this video. Squarespace is a website building service set up for you. It doesn't matter if you're a complete novice with websites or a pro, because there is also great solutions here for big companies as well. If this is a site for yourself though, this is just so easy. Simply head to squarespace.com and browse through the many website templates on offer. There are great ones for a store, for a service that you might like to offer, and even templates for big events like a wedding. Now that could earn you some brownie points with your better half. Just grab a template and start replacing the stock elements and images with your own. Squarespace even has a great stock library if you need to use that. Upload your logo if you have one, and if you don't have one, well, check this out. Squarespace has a logo builder too. Just give your brand a name, spaceship, am I right? And well, a rocket would be sweet there too. Bam, there you go, you now have a logo. Update your fonts and then change those colours over the entire site in one action. Now it is all about your content. If you want to check it out for yourself, just head to squarespace.com/MarcusHouse and save 10% off the first purchase of a website or domain. You'll find that link in the description below. So why am I so excited about NASA's Capstone mission? In a first for NASA's Artemis program, this mission is set to launch to the moon a little over a week from now, although it was supposed to be launching on the 6th of June on Monday. Anyway, this mission is going to carry this Pathfinder spacecraft into orbit and beyond via Rocket Lab's Electron. This will be a defining moment for this young and well-respected launch provider, making this mission their very first deep space assignment and their first use of the lunar photon. This is just an amazing looking vehicle capable of taking the Capstone payload all the way to a lunar orbit. This all-important mission parameter here is to ensure an accurate translunar injection and trip into a near rectilinear halo orbit around the moon, an orbit that will also in future accommodate NASA's Gateway. The journey itself will not be a quick one either, as the trip will use a low energy transfer, meaning around 3 months travel time should be about right for this mission profile. Capstone will test deep space navigation and communication in an effort to help plan for the long overdue crew mission set to return humanity to the lunar surface. In fact, the name lunar photon in this case, while relevant, does not fully convey the true capabilities of this particular vehicle design. In actual fact, its functionality is best categorized for uses well beyond this orbit, which includes destinations such as Venus and Mars. Now, last week you might recall I talked about the issue with NASA's spacesuits and the suspension of spacewalks due to a minor water leak in a helmet. Now there's more information on this one here if you want to know more about that, but great news this week because NASA has announced the companies that have been selected to move forward in developing brand new generations of spacesuits for future Artemis missions and also for their use on the International Space Station. On Wednesday this week they held an event at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, inviting a bunch of media to attend. NASA has awarded contracts to Axiom Space and Collins Aerospace. Now, sadly, neither have really publicly provided a great deal of detail about the products. Axiom, of course, we already know well given their plans to construct the world's first commercial space station and their recent Crew Dragon mission Axiom 1. Lots of nice promotion images though from Collins Aerospace. They will be making some more substantial headlines soon, I suspect, because these suits here are looking great, hopefully very close to their final appearance. So where does this leave NASA's XEMU spacesuit? Well, it seems that the costs and delays grew to such an extent that NASA may have simply put this on hold to continue with these commercial options instead. Both selected companies did say that their systems are already at an advanced state of development and they borrow from the bank of information on the XEMU design, so make of that what you will. If this model becomes as successful as the commercial crew program, I'm all for it. So yes, the new spacesuits are going to be very iconic given their future publicity as we finally advance human exploration in space and on the moon's surface. Just imagine what we will be seeing in the near future, not just with the new spacesuits, but human surface mobility systems, rovers, and just everything that will be needed. Say what you want about the SLS costs, one thing that is certain is what this entire endeavour symbolises. A very big commitment to finally having humans back well beyond low Earth orbit for the first time in decades. From there, a long-term presence at the moon and eventually off to explore Mars. It is absolutely thrilling watching all of this play out. Now, speaking of the Space Launch System, it is soon headed back to Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center for another test. Hopefully, in just a few weeks by mid-June, we will see the SLS finally complete that test, where we are going to see the launch vehicle filled with liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen propellant. This is a full simulated launch process where the countdown will proceed all the way to the point where main engine start would normally occur, essentially testing everything possible without actually igniting the engines. After the 3 failed attempts in this test in April, I sure do hope that we see everything go as planned this time around. There has been quite a lot of criticism online, and you know, I get it. It's been a long, slow and expensive process to get to this point, but that is why NASA are being so careful. The last thing that anyone wants to see is all of that investment ending in a preventable failure. It isn't just the rocket either, it's the crawler, it's the support equipment, and it's the teams all behind this technology, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to see a successful completion of this testing phase, and then next comes the Artemis I uncrewed mission. Interestingly, NASA had previously said a date for this flight would not be decided until the wet dress rehearsal. Despite this though, NASA's Administrator Bill Nelson advised the House Appropriations Committee on May 17th that he expects Artemis I to launch in August, so assuming testing goes well, we have a rough target here to be looking forward to. The actual timing of the launch is important. They can't just launch at any time. The moon needs to be in a specific position in its orbit around the Earth. Remember, this mission is going to essentially place the spacecraft into a distant retrograde orbit of the moon, having it be further away than any spacecraft built for humans has ever flown. Now, this mission will all occur over the course of around 3 weeks before Orion returns and then splashes down off the coast of California. We have a few Mars updates here too. As we saw recently, the increasing dust storm activity is spelling impending doom for the InSight mission. So what about the little helicopter Ingenuity? Well, NASA has released this footage of its record 25th flight. In this mission, Ingenuity flew around 10 metres above the surface of Mars for a distance of around 704 metres at a speed of 19 kilometres per hour. Now, this was the longest in duration flight and the furthest distance covered to date. The little helicopter's highest clocked speed was also achieved as well. In fact, the only record that this mission didn't break was its altitude record, which it was just a few feet shy of. The flight lasted some 160 seconds, so what we see here is a sped up version. Ingenuity was originally designed just for a handful of flights over a 30-sol period, and the programming team is now planning for its 29th flight. Frustratingly, of course, similar to InSight, dust covering its tiny solar array is becoming an increasing issue. While it's going to be a sad day for mission specialists when these science and exploration tools cease to work, they have performed so well. Ingenuity in particular has performed way beyond expectation. In the end though, you can't expect solar-powered equipment to have an easy time operating on the surface of a barren planet that is this far from the sun and also is plagued with these dust storms. Some neat updates with the James Webb Space Telescope. The wait is almost over now with its mirror segments beautifully aligned. In fact, it's in its final steps of preparation before starting actual science operations just a few weeks from now. We've even been told recently that the images of the first observation will be released this July. And right after that, it's going to begin the first of many incredible operations. In fact, NASA has provided us with some insights into one of Webb's first scientific missions, which is to investigate these two super-Earths known as 55 Cancri E and LHS 3844b. Now, their orbits are so close to their parent star that an entire year lasts for just a few hours. 55 Cancri E was expected to have been tidally locked, which means that one side always faces its star. But it may turn out that it's more like Mercury here, which rotates 3 times for every 2 orbits. This means that there may actually be a day-night cycle after all. If so, the conditions on these planets would be so extreme that during the day the entire surface of the planet would heat up, melt, and then vaporise to form a very thin atmosphere. In the evening, the vapour would cool and condense to form droplets of lava that would rain back to the surface, turning solid again as night falls. The brand new groundbreaking telescope could detect such changes in the atmosphere and then give us this fantastic new insight that we've never been able to measure in this detail before. Just one of the many amazing observations that it will make in its Cycle 1 Generation Observers program starting in just weeks. Cycle 1 Go is a 6,000-hour program where Webb is going to explore tons of interesting exoplanets, galaxies, stars, and black holes. So I'm extremely excited to see what we're going to find out. China's space agency is also gearing up to launch crew once again to their new Tiangong space station. Late last weekend, the huge Long March 2F rocket was rolled out to the pad in the Gobi Desert to begin preparation for this next mission, Shenzhou 14. Now, this rocket has been standing around for quite some time along with the launcher, just in case there is some kind of emergency up at the space station requiring urgent human assistance. Crew don't often launch from China, so this is a big event for the space agency, and this mission is the 3rd crew mission to the space station, and this team is going to be overseeing its continued construction with 2 huge lab modules to be added during their stay. That is going to complete the main structure of the station too, so this is an important endeavour. The 3 Taikonauts on board, I believe, are planning to stick around on the station for around 6 months or so, quite similar to the last mission which returned back in mid-April. The station has, of course, been uncrewed since then, which is quite unusual compared to the International Space Station, where we've had a permanent rotation of crew for over 20 years. There are really only a few exceptions to that, in rare occasions where the station was left empty while a spacecraft such as Soyuz was moved from one docking port to another. But with the exception of that, there's been someone on board the International Space Station all that time. This, I'm certain, is also going to eventually be the case with the Chinese space station after its completion, especially as they're considering making the station available for commercial purposes such as tourist visits and scientific research. So good luck to everybody involved in the launch of the Long March 2F. I'd like to know what you think here when you look at the crew vehicle with the standard launch escape tower on top. It all feels just a little vintage now, doesn't it? If you compare it to a vehicle like Crew Dragon or even Starliner, they both have systems that push the vehicle away rather than pull it. Saying that, Starliner's abort system is part of the service module, which isn't reused. Crew Dragon's abort system is part of the capsule itself, which is reused. So SpaceX for the win. So there you go, you are all caught up on the space news of the week. As always, thanks so much for watching all this way through. I'll be back next Saturday. I'm just so grateful to all of you here helping me what I do. It just blows my mind every single week. If you love the content, like my incredible patrons and the YouTube members here scrolling up, every little bit helps, and you can even get those ad-free videos delivered before anyone else gets to see them. The merch store link is below if you want some new gear. The new design I was wearing last week has been a pretty darn popular one. Thanks everybody for that. All that helps as well. Today, here are some links to some deeper dive videos that you might enjoy. If you haven't seen them, they aren't really part of the news cycle, so they should continue to be very relevant if you love all of these topics. Thanks again for watching. Have an amazing weekend, and I'll see you in the next video. This video is supported by Brilliant. Hey, Marcus Housesmithy here with another jam-packed week of space goodness. Starship updates across the board today from Starbase in Texas, Starbase 2 over at the Cape, and some great insights directly from SpaceX. Another Falcon 9 takes to the skies, sending Nilesat 301 into orbit. NS-21 roars off the pad, problems with Mars Ingenuity, and loads more.
Yeah, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Welcome yet again to SpaceX's Starbase facility in Texas, a site that is about to kick into high gear once again as we steamroll towards the very first test flight of the largest rocket ever created. Much larger than the Saturn V, which confuses people a little, as when you compare them side by side thanks to this great render by Tony Bella, Starship doesn't look that much larger, does it? Only around 10 or 11 metres in height difference, although we're probably cheating there with the launch escape tower. Keep in mind though that the Saturn V had a huge volume of liquid hydrogen. All this yellow stuff here is shown in one of my favourite animations of all time by Hayes Grey Art, showing all of these rockets as if they were transparent. Now that hydrogen takes up a lot of space for not much weight because, well, it's hydrogen. So when we're really comparing size, we need to compare mass more than anything. The Saturn V was a little over 2,800 metric tonnes. The full stack Starship is not known well yet as it's still evolving, but that is estimated to be around 5,000 metric tonnes. Even if it ends up being a little lighter, this is well over 75% more massive. Can SpaceX lift this behemoth out of the atmosphere on the first orbital flight test? We could know very soon, and I'll be covering it here every week as always. So how have things been progressing this week? Ship 24, the upper stage of the beast, started off at suborbital pad A for testing. This was the first ship to be placed on this pad since the SM-15 prototype over a year ago. After being lifted up onto the pad and unhooked from the LR11000 crane, the quick disconnect was promptly connected up to the vehicle. On Monday, the road was closed and the pad was cleared in advance of its second cryogenic proof test, but the first on pad A. Over an hour later, vehicles returned to the pad to work on something, but the road remained closed. Soon after, however, the pad was re-cleared, and at 3 p.m, cryogenic liquid and nitrogen began loading into the vehicle. Testing continued for several hours, with final detanking occurring at 9 p.m, with that full cryogenic test being successfully completed, we assume. Action again the next day too. In the morning, the pad was cleared again with a new cryo test kicking off at around 1 p.m. 2 hours later, the lower tank was completely full. Then came the methane tank. At 5 p.m, after both were fully frosted up, the vehicle was detanked. So why this second test? Well, this time we believe that the thrust puck load testing device was used, which simulates the thrust of the Raptor engines on the ship itself. Also, a noteworthy addition for Ship 24 after having those tiles blown off a few weeks back. This week, the vehicle has received new replacement tiles. So after completing the test, it was hooked back up to the crane Wednesday, lifted off, and then placed onto the transport stand. By Thursday afternoon, the road closure provided Ship 24 the opportunity to roll back to the production site for Raptor 2 installation in the high bay. Static fire tests hopefully now coming real soon, as we of course await the all-important update from the FAA, which is hopefully Monday the 13th. What do you think? Are we going to finally have that final assessment? Place your bets. At the production facility, Ship 25's stacking has begun. Both the common and the middle liquid oxygen section were moved into the high bay just recently. The middle liquid oxygen section was placed onto the turntable and the common section was stacked on top. Again, we saw the two sections spin slowly as the robot welder joined the two sections together. Additionally, Ship 25's mate, Booster 8, had its liquid oxygen tank section leave the high bay, and that was moved into the mega bay, presumably ahead of final stacking. Now, I've got a few updates on a new test tank this week, which is made to test the new smooth domes. The previously spotted E-dome with the 3-ring bottom section made with the 5th smooth dome was lifted into the mid-bay last week. This week, the top section, called the sleeve dev with the 3rd smooth dome, was lifted and stacked on top, completing that test tank. Wednesday morning, the road was closed to allow it to roll out of the production facility and off to the launch site. It also seems that we've got another test tank on the way, but this time it is for a booster stress test. This new section has been moved into the ring yard, which we believe is the upper dome for booster 7.1. The ring watchers on Twitter pointed out this part of the section, which seemed to give us a few more ideas on the upcoming testing campaign. This, we think, acts as an interface between the can crusher cap and the thin 4mm tank wall. Looking at this new section, we can see that same black interface once again. If this is indeed the same piece, it seems that the B7.1 test tank will be put through its paces on the can crusher. Now, we recently saw a secret meeting taking place behind the rolled out ring sections captured by Lab Padre. At the time, we wasn't sure what this was about, but now we know. That was a presentation given by Elon Musk titled Company All Hands. On Twitter, he provided us with a lot of information with these slides used at the presentation. Some very noteworthy takeaways from this I thought was super interesting. Firstly, Starlink version 2 will be double stacked, where the two stacks sit next to each other, arranged very much like the Starlink version 1s with Falcon 9 missions. On Starship though, they will be spat out in that Pez dispenser style mechanism that we've been talking about over the past week, so it's great to see it simulated here direct from SpaceX like this. Booster 7 and Ship 24 are still seen as the pair for the first orbital flight test. That is a very good sign. Then this picture was shared with Booster 7's engine installation, or at least the start of it, showing these outer Raptor boost engines fixed in place, and we think one of the 10 inner ring of engines in front here. Obviously this is an old image already, because Musk just today tweeted this. Yep, the entire set of 33 Raptor engines are now installed. Could this mean the start of the static fire testing campaign this week? What do you think? Lastly, one of the most exciting takeaways from the slideshow here are these renders of the finished starbase at Texas, as well as the next starbase being worked on at the Cape. Speaking of the Cape site, another NASA spaceflight flyover video this week, and the full link to this is in the description if you want to check it all out. Now, there's some awesome shots here of both the progress on the Roberts Road Starbase facility and Pad 39A, which will launch starships in the future. The Roberts Road facility continues to take shape, with more pile driving taking place for the main production building. There are a total of 6 tower segments built here, with the 7th kicking off as well, and right next to the tower segments it looks like ground support equipment is also being assembled. Concrete has already been poured for part of the base of the large high bay that will be used to stack ships and boosters for launches out of the K2. And if we compare this to Musk's shared presentation render, it now becomes very clear how this structure will look when finished. SpaceX has even submitted updated plans for the Roberts Road Starship production area, as shared by Harry Stranger. The main factory is now a total of 60,200 square metres, which is 12,600 square metres larger than in previous plans. This also shows confirmation that there will actually be 2 high bays, each 3,000 square metres. There is some big investment here, that is for sure. Over at pad 39A though, we have a freshly updated shot of all 6 pillars vertical now for the orbital launch mount. Thanks to Julia. The launch tower beside has some obvious updates too. A core difference between this tower and the one at Texas is that this one is much wider at the base. This could allow the hoist for the tower arms to potentially be attached more effectively instead of utilising the simpler overhang support structure. That, I imagine, is an improvement as a result of what has been learned from the first launch tower. The tracks of a massive new large crane are also visible here, which is a great sign that the tower stacking may happen soon and happen quite rapidly, hopefully this summer. It's important, of course, just to convey how incredible it is to have NASA spaceflight constantly covering so much of this information. Greg Scott obviously also independently doing flights over the Cape as well, and all this provides so much constant information to all of us. Likewise, the work done in Starbase with Boca Chica Gal, the amazing Starship Gazer, and RGB aerial photography. If you love these updates, please do support them all on Patreon or their preferred platforms, and they need all the support they can get. No different to what I do right here. Thank you all so much for subscribing, supporting these videos. It's a real privilege being able to present this to you each week. SpaceX launched a Falcon 9 this week with a Nilesat 301 mission after a very lengthy time between flights. Can you believe that there have been no SpaceX launches since May the 25th? Look, I'm joking of course, and imagine a few years ago having a cadence like SpaceX. It's bizarre to think that going more than a week now without a launch seems kind of odd. Anyway, the Falcon 9 leapt off the pad at Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida, sending Egypt's 4.1-ton communication satellite into a geostationary transfer orbit. This satellite is designed to provide broadcast coverage over the Middle East and Africa. This one is going to fill the gap left by the Nilesat 101 and 102 satellites retired years ago. Now, interestingly, this was Flight 7 for Booster 1062, having launched some iconic missions such as Inspiration 4 and Axiom 1 into orbit, and as always, a beautiful pinpoint landing on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Now, the interesting part is that it was previously believed that this mission was going to use Booster 1049, which has flown 10 times, and that would be completely discarded rather than landing simply because it was an old, outdated model. Although it is still a Block 5, it is one of the earliest to be produced, having its first flight back in 2018. Now, those ones are said to be particularly frustrating to reuse. The current 3 record holders, having flown it 12 times, had their first flights in 2019 and 2020, just for comparison. Anyway, that's just a side note, but yes, another successful mission here for SpaceX, as the Nilesat 301 satellite was released to gently drift away to later fire up its engines to place it into a full geostationary orbit. Congrats SpaceX on yet another successful mission. Sadly though, SpaceX's commercial resupply service mission 25 for NASA did not launch as expected on June the 10th. This wasn't a scrub due to the usual suspects either, such as adverse weather conditions. Sometime during last weekend, propellant was being loaded into the Cargo Dragon spacecraft, and during that process, safety measurement equipment detected an issue. Elevated hydrazine vapor readings were emanating from somewhere in the Draco thruster system. These small thrusters, not to be confused with the much more powerful Super Dracos that we see used on Crew Dragon's abort system, are used for various orbital maneuvers like approach and departure while visiting the International Space Station, as well as the all-important slow deorbit burn. So yes, while this news is not ideal, it does shine a light on the ever-present safety protocols in use and vigilance required when working with such volatile substances. So for now, CRS-25 is on hold until the root cause of the elevated propellant vapor is identified and a mitigation plan is implemented. Only then will NASA and SpaceX decide on a new launch date for this particular capsule. We have another launch of New Shepard by Blue Origin this week, and I already know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey Marcus, this is not a substantial rocket launch, it just goes up and down, why cover it? I mean, we've seen this before, this phallic-looking little rocket cruising past the drone at liftoff. There goes Dick. Evan Dick, to be more specific, just one of the tourists on this mission who is currently a member of Dick Holdings LLC. I mean, you really can't make this stuff up, can you? As with the previous flights, the signal from the ground was still just terrible. Just listen to this garbled mess. So yes, the 6 crew on board this one, but Katya in particular I think has the most interesting story, with her being an engineer at JPL who has worked on the Perseverance rover along with doing some interesting engineering on the Europa Clipper mission that is planned to be sent out to Jupiter's icy moon sometime in 2024. Anyway, I'm really glad that she got to experience this trip in particular, and you can see here just how overwhelmed she was by all of this. We had another great touchdown of the booster and the capsule there shortly after. I will say the capsule there had a reasonable amount of lateral speed there on this one, as those small retro rockets fired to cushion the impact of touchdown. Hopefully it was a smooth ride. Everybody looked perfectly delighted after they stepped out, so another mission down for Blue Origin. We also had NASA's Artemis I rocket heading back to Launch Complex 39B at the start of the week. This slow trip began just after midnight on Monday, June the 6th, and it continued to pass the early dawn light, providing yet another memorable backdrop, as we can see here. Several hours later, SLS finally reached its destination in preparation of the second wet dress rehearsal attempt. Essentially, this is a mock launch countdown carried out over 2 days to test all processes apart from the engine ignition. As we saw back on the first attempt in April, there was issues ranging from nitrogen supply problems to ground support equipment that would just not cooperate. After the 3 attempts that month, it was sent back to the vehicle assembly building for some fixes. With SLS now back at the pad, it is speculated that we could see this testing underway sometime around June the 17th. Should things go as hoped, we could see Orion soon being launched and then on its way to the moon and back again very soon. I'm really hoping that we can see this demonstration squared away this time, so that we can all look forward to the moment when we see this massive rocket take flight for the first time. Okay, so NASA's James Webb Space Telescope and the teams at NASA are going to be releasing its first full colour images and spectroscopic data on July the 12th. Yep, that is tomorrow. Missed it by 1 day, but I just can't wait to see these images. Obviously, it has been a long 6-month period of preparation before it was able to do this, but here we are, finally awaiting these first images. As stated beautifully by Eric Smith, the Webb program scientist at NASA headquarters, the release of Webb's first full-colour images will offer a unique moment for all of us to stop and marvel at a view humanity has never seen before. These images will be the culmination of decades of dedication, talent and dreams, but they will also be just the beginning. That is absolutely true, and there's also, I suspect, a feeling of wonder right now, because this telescope is just so powerful that it is difficult for the NASA team to predict exactly how these first images will look. Now, there are things that they expect to see, but with such high resolution infrared data, it is really unprecedented. After all this occurs, the telescope can then finally get stuck into its first long mission. Now, it's also worth noting that NASA did report a tiny impact to the telescope here from May. It's nothing to worry about, as small dust-sized particles are going to cause damage over time, but yeah, just be aware of all those breaking news reports suggesting this is some kind of disaster. It's actually quite expected. Another update on the Mars Ingenuity helicopter, it has now been revealed that the helicopter's inclinometer navigation sensor has stopped functioning. Now, one would think that this is the end of the helicopter flights, but not necessarily. Ingenuity's sensor suite provides some redundancy when it comes to sensing altitude. The other sensors on board may be able to compensate for this loss, which is still being patched by the NASA team. Still waiting to see how successful this may be, but they are not so smooth for Ingenuity, and certainly looking more and more like the InSight lander has almost had its day. Now, just quickly, so many of you wrote in comments last week wondering why Ingenuity can't just fly over InSight to blow the dust off the panels. Well, simple answer to that one is that they are well beyond 3,500 kilometres away from each other, so unless we want to see Ingenuity spending the next 80 years or so trying to get over there, which is impossible for so many reasons I'm not going to bother getting into, a super risky attempt to hover over InSight and blow some very thin atmosphere at the panels is certainly off the cards. China's Shenzhou 14 mission, crewed with 3 heroic taikonauts, lifted off to continue work on the Chinese space station last Sunday. More on that shortly, but real quick, a huge thanks to Brilliant for supporting this video. Brilliant is a website and mobile application that is built to make learning STEM subjects fun while using interactivity to engage your mind. That has always been the key for me, interactivity. So many ask how I learned about what we all talk about on the channel here so often. For me, it's just the love of learning. If you're able to train yourself to make learning fun, it isn't a task anymore, it's just a part of a great life. There is just so much I don't understand in so many areas, and I can play with Brilliant for hours exploring these topics. The course content and daily challenges helps you to not only see many of these fascinating concepts visually, but also to engage with them. You can guarantee that what you are learning is very well planned and organised too. All of the courses are crafted by award-winning teachers and professionals that design all of these lessons with active learning in mind. I've been really enjoying the neural network content here lately, as I know nothing about that at all. How these neurons and weight exercises break this down is just fascinating to me. To give it a try for free, just head to brilliant.org/MarcusHouse from the link below, and if you follow that one, the first 200 will also get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Pretty awesome stuff. Thank you, Brilliant. So yes, China's Shenzhou 14 crewed mission was launched successfully from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center just under a week ago. Before we knew it, the spacecraft had completed a fast automated rendezvous and docking with the Earth-facing port of the docking hub. That was less than 7 hours after the launch, and it all appeared to be a very smooth process too. While the three are here, they are going to be assisting and managing the arrival of 2 brand new 20+ metric ton modules as they are added to the space station. Those should be launching in July and October. Now, a number of you wanted a little comparison on size here. The Chinese space station is expected to have a total mass somewhere between 60 and 70 metric tons. The ISS has a mass over 420, so this is about 6 times less massive, and it puts it closer to the mass of something like the old Skylab, while resembling something similar to, say, Russia's Mir space station. Make no mistake though, the International Space Station is old, and it's going to be retired at the end of this decade as it currently stands. Here, this brand new technology will have some advantages, short term at least. As I said last week, they are considering making the station available for commercial purposes as well as tourist visits and scientific research. This is a great reason why it is so critical for new space stations to be built to compete well into the future. Where the funding and the will tends to politically switch back and forth for NASA, China has a very determined focus here. Having that same focus and determination is absolutely critical to remain well ahead into the future. So there we go, you are all caught up in space news for another week. Are there any topics that you would like me to dive further into in another video? You tend to ask better questions than I have in my mind, and potentially also better for a wider audience. I do find that the problem with covering the basics is that the subscriber base here already knows a lot about all that stuff anyway, so they tend to not engage with those as much. Anyway, I'm interested to know what you think. I so appreciate your opinions. If I have earned your subscription today, a big welcome to you. Everyone that has been here subscribed for a long time though, thanks so much for watching time and time again. If you are helping me out on Patreon or picking up some merch, thank you so much. If you would like to join all of these great people to get ad-free video releases and to just hang out with this awesome community on our exclusive Discord channels, patreon.com/MarcusHouse. Now, as with last week's end screen here, everybody seemed to appreciate the links to my deeper dive videos that were not so much a part of the news cycle, so there they are right there. Enjoy your week. I'll see you in the next video. This video is supported by Brilliant. Hey, Marcus House with you here. Well, I could have made 2 of these videos this week if I'd had the time, because it has been a crazy one. A huge amount to talk about with Starship and the star bases as always, exciting test articles, Booster 7 rolling out, and so much more there. Falcon 9 flights aplenty, and then all of these things happened as well. So rather than listing them all out, let's just jump into it.
Yeah, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Yet another fun week of Starship news. As I touched on last weekend, during the Starlink launch, we could see the construction of the orbital launch pad at Launch Complex 39A was about to get underway. You could see the first tower segment, the boom for the LR-11-350 crane being constructed, and some odd ring structures nearby here, which we're still trying to figure out. During this week, the massive crane in the power boom configuration transitioned to its upright position, ready for the construction of the orbital launch and integration tower. On Tuesday morning, thanks to this terrific footage from Spaceflight Now, we could see SpaceX lifting that first segment of the tower into place on top of the concrete base. This section, along with all of the other completed prefabricated tower sections, have a variety of railings, elevator shafts, doorways, walkways, hardpoints, plumbing, and pre-installed stuff. Each section and all of its plumbing and hardware will just need to be connected after each stack, and the process should be far easier and faster than the methods that SpaceX used in South Texas. While talking about the orbital launch tower, Spaceflight Now also captured sections of the chopstick arms making their way to the Cape on the back of a truck. Following that, another section of the launch tower headed over, and it was stacked very soon after. Meanwhile, over at the Texas Starbase production facility, the Buckner LR-11000 crane, not to be confused with SpaceX's one, was laid down, possibly for the final time, after completing its work on the Mega Bay. Once it was fully laying down on the ground, teams began the task of disassembling this giant beast. Just beside where the Mega Bay is being constructed is the new Star Factory building, which has progressed greatly since we last spoke about it. Thanks to these amazing views by RGB aerial photography, we can see the true scale of this massive building. The team has been seen working on the roof already, with the insulation being laid down, followed by the roof panelling itself. Once they lift up the pieces for the last end wall, we should start to see the work on the roof really ramp up. Nearby, we see a load of air conditioning units that we think will be mounted here on the side of the building. It would get super hot in here too, especially in the summer, so certainly a requirement. Now, after being moved to the launch site last week, the B7.1 test tank was rolled over to the can crusher and was attached to SpaceX's LR-11000 crane to lift it onto the can crusher base. The crane was detached and it soon picked up the can crusher cap, placing it on top. The next step before testing, of course, was to attach the ropes to the bottom of the can crusher. So yes, the entire stack there sat close by the so-called E-Dome test tank. That's a completely different test tank, by the way, which doesn't have the stringers up the top here like the 7.1 tank. So, as we get closer to the exciting test campaign of Booster 7 and Ship 24 with the orbital flight test just months away, Elon Musk recently provided hints on the process, saying that there will probably be several launch countdowns before SpaceX passes all of those abort triggers. Still very optimistic sounding for July, so yes, it's going to be fun to see how many attempts it will take to get through the full process. The news of the week really though was the rollout of Booster 7, this time with all 33 engines installed. SpaceX posted a few aerial shots on their Twitter account. Check these out. The massive 70-metre tall beast with humans for scale. Just an hour later, arriving at the launch site, it was finally time to see the huge tower arms lift a Booster 7 onto the orbital launch mount. Given this was the very first time, they took it very slowly and carefully. It moved over to the arms and rolled between them, then waited several hours before the lift was finally underway at 10:30 p.m. Once high enough, the booster was rotated around directly over the orbital launch mount, and carefully it was lowered until the alignment pins on the mount could be inserted. Now, this ensures that it is completely stable before it is finally lowered into place without damaging the outer 20 Raptor boost engines. Once all of the hold down clamps were engaged, the arms were able to let go, leaving it freestanding right there. The arms then moved back down into a resting position at the bottom of the tower, and the ship quick disconnect arm extended back out. So yes, how cool is that? The very first lift ever of a booster using the arms, and it looked absolutely flawless. It is now time for static fire testing. It is unclear what the testing campaign will look like. I'd be guessing a few single engine tests, followed by tests of the full rings, perhaps then even a full 33 Raptor test fire. Wishful thinking perhaps, but if they do that, I would bet they would have all those Raptor 2s right down to the minimum. I can't wait to share what we've learned by this time next week. Regarding its companion Ship 24, RGB captured a shot from above of the previously unknown mystery box that we now believe is a loading mechanism to feed Starlink version 2 satellites into the ships. Where will those satellites come from? Well, one thought is that this new Pez dispenser loader may be filled up itself at this new building here. Imagine that Starlink satellites are dropped off and stored at this location, and the water is there simply to be topped up for the next Starship. Now, Now, just to be clear, this is all pure speculation, but fun speculation, I think you'll agree. Along with that, the next ship in line, Ship 25, had its Starlink dispenser rack lifted into its nose cone barrel on Wednesday. Heading down the road to the launch site, the amazing Starship Gazer captured new scaffolding going up at the top of the orbital launch tower. In fact, you can actually see the new lightning truss installed in the lower part of the scaffolding there. I was wondering if we would see some sort of lightning protection system at the top. Now we have that answer. The SpaceX team have also been seen working on the 2 vertical methane tanks that never passed the approvals to actually hold liquid methane. Because there is now plenty of the methane storage in the horizontal tanks, could they possibly be turning these into extra liquid oxygen or liquid nitrogen tanks? All of that extra oxygen would be handy if that leaves enough nitrogen to use for super chilling all of the propellant. It's really hard to know exactly how much nitrogen they need for that job. Anyway, we're not really going to have a concrete idea until we see the final pump. I'm interested to know what you think. Nearby, the suborbital side of the launch facility, workers have been seen modifying suborbital pad B to support testing of the Ship 22 design and up. These are the same modifications as suborbital pad A, as well as a new quick disconnect system which is currently in progress. From this ground shot here, you can see the quick disconnect panel there, and just a few days later, workers were seen connecting up the flex hoses to hook up the panel to the propellant farm. So there's loads of great work going on as the site prepares for launch. Shout out this week goes to Tyne N for this incredibly beautiful new render of a future Starship being caught out of the sky by the tail arms. It still kind of blows my mind that this could be intended. Certainly one of those live in the sea kind of scenes. Remember though, people were extremely skeptical for a long time before Falcon 9 landings too, and here we are seeing them daily in some cases. Everything is impossible until it's done. Give Tyne a follow there. It's always super helpful of you to support the community's great work. And again, I'm getting a bunch of people telling me that they've been unsubscribed here without doing it themselves. Those comments had died off for a while, but they're back again, so I don't know. YouTube is all just black magic to me. Every time I think that I kind of know what's going on, something else changes. Anyway, shortly after my video last Saturday went live, there were 2 more SpaceX Falcon 9 launches from opposite sides of the country. Rounding out a record-breaking 3 launches in under 37 hours was the Sarah 1 mission from the West Coast, followed by the Globalstar FM-15 from the East Coast. With the West Coast launch of Sarah 1, I was not surprised at all by this view when the coverage began from Pad 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Station. Just look at that fog layer. You can barely even make out the Falcon 9 there getting ready to launch. Inside the fairings of this one was the 4-ton Sarah 1 satellite built by Airbus. Now, something that I don't often appreciate is the amazing job behind the scenes that the teams go through to get the satellites ready for launch. Sarah 1 had to be shipped from Germany, of course, and it was pretty impressive seeing the video of the logistics effort required to get it all the way here. It was a 25-day odyssey covering 8 US states. Once it first arrived in Baltimore, the cargo was masterfully loaded onto the deck of the waiting semi before being secured and then hitting the road. Now, I know the crews here are professional truck drivers, but just imagine hauling such expensive cargo all that distance. An incredible job from all those involved as the payload arrives at Vandenberg. So yes, fast forward, and now here we were waiting at the pad for liftoff, and there we go, it's ascent on its way, punching through that low altitude fog layer and into the clear blue sky onward to orbit. Some great views here of the 9 Merlin engines powering Falcon 9, and with that we soon find main engine cutoff, stage separation, and goodbye to that second stage. That was all we saw of it, because due to the custom request, SpaceX to show the second stage coverage. Just this magic as the booster completed its boost back burn to head back to landing zone 4, very close to where it lifts off from. Remember, the booster rapidly removes its velocity, but it also keeps climbing for a while too. After just moments, it was time for the re-entry burn, shedding enough velocity to keep it intact as it plunges back into the atmosphere. The coverage from the ground layer was tough there due to the fog, but there we go, yet another perfect landing after popping back through that layer and onto landing zone 4. That was this booster's 3rd flight and landing, so only an infant compared to the Starlink record-breaking 13th flight just before this one. Next up on the East Coast this time, SpaceX were preparing Globalstar FM-15 at Pad 40 Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. With this mission launching on time, it was change. The Falcon 9 booster for this mission had 8 previous successful missions completed already, but this 9th flight was an intriguing mission to deliver the Global Star 15 voice and data communication satellite to orbit. It was a beautiful clear night shot of the liftoff as Falcon 9 roared off into the darkness just after midnight local